So I was not planning to do another vlog post about coronavirus, but it does appear that that's what's on everybody's mind. Every time I turn on the TV, every time I look at Facebook, somebody's talking about coronavirus, and I'm gonna admit it's on my mind too. Um, so this week again is related to coronavirus. This week is called Wondering Why. And I think there are some of us who are wondering why. We're wondering why we have to go through this. I went to the funeral of a loved one this week, and there were lots of people that I had not seen in a long time, and I was kind of wondering why I couldn't hug them and or shake hands like I naturally would. But we can't do that. There are germs out there, and they are real, and I don't want them. So, wondering why. I began to think about the book of Job this week. In the book of Job, which is an Old Testament book, we're not sure who the author is. A lot of biblical scholars think that Moses wrote the book of Job. But in the book of Job, you have a man who was an upright, upstanding, righteous man. God has described him as an humble servant. He's a good man in God's eyes, not just in his friends' eyes, but in God's eyes. So in the book of Job, he appears to be a fairly rich man based on the way he's described. He's got several thousand donkeys, and he's got oxen and sheep, and he's got 10 children. 7 of them are boys, and he's married. So he seems to, have things together. Job is a good guy. Um, so in a conversation or in a meeting, when God meets with the angels, Satan comes too. That got to me. Satan came to the meeting with the angels. And yes, Satan says he's been roaming about the earth and going back and forth on it. So think about that. Satan just said he'd been roaming about the earth and going back and forth on it, but he was doing some things. He was causing a lot of havoc and trouble and distress in a lot of people's lives as he was roaming about the earth. Um, so in this conversation between Satan and God Almighty, Job's name comes up, and it seems that Satan thinks that he can tempt Job into turning his back on God. Or if he doesn't completely turn his back, he can get Job to speak against God. God says, no, you can't. I don't, Job would not do that. Job and we have a very strong relationship. You cannot get Job to do that. And Satan says, well, I'm going to try. And God says, well, you just better not touch a hair on his head. You better not touch the man himself. So Satan sets out going back and forth over Job's life. Um, there's a fire and all of his camels are killed. A lot of his servants are killed. The oxen are dead. And the final straw is that it says a windstorm comes about. I don't know if it's a tornado. It doesn't say tornado, but a wind comes about, and it causes the house to collapse when all 10 of his children are there. His 10 children are there with I think the oldest brother, and the house collapses and all of his 10 children are killed. So Job is very sad and depressed. Job is suffering because of his great losses. Um, his wife comes to him and she just can't stand it anymore. And she says, why don't you curse God and die? Job's response is to tell her that she is foolish for thinking that way. So 3 of Job's friends come to visit, and they just can't believe their eyes. His body is covered in these sores and scabs. They can't believe their eyes. They don't even have anything to say. They came to console him, but they couldn't even console him. For 7 days, they sit on the ground with him, and no one says a word. Well, after the 7 days, they do begin to talk. And as humans do, we begin to rationalize. And so they were trying to make sense of all of the things that happened. To a lot of people, if you're a good person, then only good things will happen to you. If you're a bad person, then bad things will happen. So they're wondering if there's some sin within and God was punishing him. They're trying to figure out why all of this stuff would just happen to him. And he's he curses the day he was born, but he does not curse God. He does not speak against God through all of that. And so as we enter the coronavirus season, we don't know how long this season is going to last. And it is normal and natural for us to wonder why. But in that, we should not speak against God. We should not curse God. We should not speak against God. We shouldn't even question God. We should take it as it comes. In Romans 8:28, Paul tells us that all things work together for the good of those that love the Lord. And that is true. All things work together. We don't know all things. We think we know all things, but we only know some things. God knows all things, and God is who works all things out for the good of those who love him. So as you're wondering why this week, trust him. Just trust him. Do what the authorities say and trust God. That is my message for today. Trust God through your wondering. Thank you for listening. I would ask if you would post me a comment that just has the state that you live in. I'd like to know where my subscribers are. So if you would please post me your state. Thank you. Be safe. Boop. Elbow.